All right, and we are live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Hobby Cheating Q&A live. What is this? Well, this is a video where we spend about an hour. I do it once a month where I will answer all of your hobby cheating related questions. And Basically, if you've got a hobby question, you can drop it into the chat wherever that is on the screen. And uh, and I will answer the question. That's pretty much how this goes. I'm sorry, I have to change the name of the stream real quick. Or the stream. It's the stream. Ha! Because no matter what I do, it always seems to want to save the last stream that I uploaded. It keeps the same name. Even when I change it before the stream. You know, life's funny that way, right? Who knows? Not me. So, at any rate, that's what we're doing right now. So we'll wait for some folks to join in and start asking some questions. It's tougher since I can't schedule these right now. I'm working on figuring that out. I promise I will. I will get it all together eventually. Learning little things every time. I keep messing around with this program. The problem is, I am an old person who doesn't understand technology and is much more comfortable in the manual world of paints and stuff like that. When it comes to actually doing things digitally, well, you know, there we go. So, at any rate, if you've got some hobby questions, go ahead and drop them in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and tweet out that we're live now. So, let's do this. Get that out there. All right. So, while I'm while I'm working on or while I'm waiting on some more questions. So it's not actually the Lord of Malice. It's a different model. I am working on him right now. He's right here. I'm actually working on some skin tones right now on him. Laid down the basics, and now we're doing some fun skin tone stuff. This is the King of Ecstasy. It's the match to the Queen of Ecstasy that I painted up before. Every queen needs a king. So it's a model that's releasing here in about a week, I think, is when it comes out, sometime next week. So they were nice enough to send me one beforehand to get a chance to paint it. So I'm trying to be responsible and get some paint on it. And what I'm working on right now is just blending out. I'm sure it's not going to show up on camera, but I'm just blending out these skin tones across his chest. He's got this great muscularity. So I'm just working on that and trying to use some interesting colors. Even though I with sort of keepers of secrets or pseudo keepers, I don't really feel the need to make all of their skin exactly the same. I almost never use the same skin tone recipe twice. So like this time I'm using some black leather from Scale 75, some Flesh 5 from War Colors, some Shadow Flesh, the new color from Pro Acryl, some Game Color Verdigris and Maggot White from Vallejo and Reaper respectively. We've got some Violet Gray from the Scale Color uh, artist stuff, and then just some of their Dead White. So yeah, and then a little bit of purple ink as well. It was interesting to me to try to use the green colors as a highlight for Flesh. I thought that would be an interesting play against the red or the sort of pseudo pink red of the shadows. So we'll see how that works. But folks watching, start dropping those questions in so we can get right into it, and we'll get some answers going. Looks like the chat is active now, so go ahead and drop in your hobby related questions, and I'll talk about and I'll answer those. Interesting thing about this model, I'll keep rambling while we're waiting, is as you can see, he has to be in a lot of sub-assemblies. I don't normally love sub-assemblies, but this was pretty necessary because he's got this big sword that kind of sits like across his body, and I wanted to be able to do that separately. Obviously the head, which I went for the goat head. There's both like a goat head and a I don't know, more human-ish, demonish head. He's got a shield, so we'll use him as the shield variant. And I actually really like how that's sort of meant to snap in there. And I really like the shield because it's just a nice big flat space, as you can see there. So that's going to be an excellent freehand opportunity. The thing I didn't use, and this is my thing with a lot of creature caster models, is he has these two extra big pieces of armor that normally sit on his legs. And I just didn't like the way that affected the silhouette. It made him seem less, it was way too bottom heavy. Kind of like Khorne, like Skull Reapers. So I just didn't use those and green stuffed over the thing to make them fit. And called it a day, because why not? And then he also has his cloak, like that sits on his back. So that's there. That covers his butt. And then, most importantly, perhaps, on the King of Ecstasy, is he has this little belt buckle piece that I'll see if I can stick it on here real quick, because you really need to have it stuck to the model for the full impression. So let me grab a little piece of blue tack here. And we'll stick this on, and you'll see the joke in play. There you go. If that shows, he has this piece of armor coming out like that. So it's a bit on the nose, you know. But hey, why not? Who doesn't love a little comedy in their miniatures? And it seems appropriate for sort of a male ecstasy. There you go. Ecstasy. Yes. All right. Yes, what about that cod piece? Yeah, it's for real. It is full on. So, yeah, I've got the old keeper up here, as you can see on my screen. I was just kind of looking at her, the last one I did. Just kind of looking at some of the colors I used. Didn't know if I wanted to do the exact same thing, but just thinking about it. All right. What's in the box? Oh, yes. Okay, the 7 reference, right? What's in the box? Sorry. Absolutely. But I'm excited for it. This is a lot of fun to paint. And doing skin is one of my favorite things to do. And there'll be a video that kind of comes out of this. So that'll be fun. I'm actually going to record it sometime after we finish this Q&A. So there you go. All right. So drop in some questions, people. Come on, let's go. I like to see you chat. I do. So hello, everyone. It's very good to see all of you. But let's also get some questions firing off. I want to make sure we're answering some. You know, when I do a stream like this might be one of those ones that I do like the stream starting soon thing, and then just cut that 10 minutes from. That way I give people a chance to join up. That's probably the smart way to go. I'll think about it. Either that or I'll figure out a better way to schedule it so people can be more ready and like actually have the link ready. But I'm working with it. So that's awesome, Elminster. Well, if I'm helping in any way the great sage of Shadowdale, then I'm more than happy to assist. I mean, you know, it's quite an honor. You've helped me in many adventures when my party was at the brink of death, by suddenly showing up and, you know, training a dog and swinging a healing wand around or something like that. So I'm appreciative of all your service, Elminster. So Anthony asked, how is the display board going? Yeah, so I'm working on the big display board. I don't think you can see it because it's kind of off camera, but it's over here on this side of my shoulder. The answer is it's almost done. All the buildings are done. They're out of reach, sadly. All the painting is done. There's just water effect at this point. And so I was using some magic water for that. There will be a video around the whole display board. So I'll have a too long, in my traditional style, I will have a too long video around display boards. And so now I'm just trying to let the water effect dry, which takes forever, just forever. And despite my repeated and multiple attempts to make sure that I had everything caulked up before I put it in there, because I had 2 layers of MDF foam together, despite my best intentions and efforts of repeatedly trying to get that all caulked together, apparently there was still a couple small gaps because the water managed to somewhat run out on one side before drying enough to stop it. So I'm going to have to re-pour that side. There is nothing worse in this hobby than display boards, unless it's water effects on display boards. And then you're really just in the worst place. The absolute worst. But it's going along, so it's almost done. I mean, I'm not actively really doing much anymore. It's just letting this thing sit behind me, hang over my head like the sword of Damocles, as over the next couple days I have to keep repouring. All right, so let's keep those questions coming. Derek says, "Hey Vince, what's the best way to learn about interference colors in non-metallic metal?" I don't know. I should probably do a whole video about it. I'll make a note about that because I don't know that I've ever really seen a video on it. But I guess, hold on, I'm making a note. There you go. All right. I think the best way is just to sort of look at nature or think about the world like around the miniature, because any color works. Like an interference color is just a reflection. It's meant to be light pollution, right? So assuming that they're sort of standing in a blank field or something, let's assume you've got a mini standing on a hilltop in an otherwise blank field. Your potential interference colors right there are blue from the sky, green or brown from the ground, and yellow from the yellow light of the sun. And all of those are perfectly valid, right? And each of them is going to give a slightly different mood to the nature of the piece. The key is it always has to be so super light. So it's beyond glazing, it's filtering, right? Which people who professionally airbrush are, very familiar with filters, because filters are very easy with your airbrush. And they do them a lot in all sorts of different painting sort of tricks. But filters are when you run like a hyper thin version of a color over it to just slightly change the tint. And it needs to be run over something relatively bright. So I usually say the interference color goes over the mid-high. The language I tend to use is there are 5 general areas of volume on a miniature: high, mid-high, medium, mid-low, and low. Now those can change in size. You might have like 10% of your total volume be high and mid-high. So you could have a very sharp, thin reflection. It could be relatively evenly spaced. It could be very little dark. So like when people paint super bright polished steel, if you look like Land, he'll often really shrink his dark volumes down. He still goes dark, but he'll often have them be quite minimal. And then sometimes he'll take them way up through the roof. So it just depends on kind of the lighting situation. But the real answer is just pick some colors and go nuts. It doesn't really matter in the end. If you pick colors that are on the miniature, it's a good way to sneak additional elements of that miniature into another place to balance the colors out. And theoretically, if the person's wearing like a big red robe and swinging around a bright, shiny, reflective sword, it's going to reflect some of that red, right? So you could really use anything as if like that would be in the world around them or is on them or would make sense with the ambient light, which doesn't leave many things off the table, right? So that's kind of my quick thing on interference colors. But I should do a video on it because you can use interference colors in non-metallic metal or true metallic metal. And I kind of cover it a little bit when I talk about the true metallic steel shading video, like maybe Hobby Cheating 73 or something. When I'm doing the weapon on the Zangor, that's where I put some like blue and brown in to sort of use a sort of sky earth interference color scheme. George, try coating the surface with PVA before the pour. Would that work? Yes, it generally would. The issue is there's so much space here because it's the size of a display board. I did do that. I did a layer of actual thick PVA glue, then a PVA glue water mixture, and then I dumped a whole bottle of varnish, like literally a whole bottle of varnish around the edge. The problem is there's almost, like actual real space, there's probably almost 4 feet of edge here that where this leak could potentially happen. So it's just hard to make sure it's completely sealed when you've got that much space. That's like a wall. So there you go. But yeah, that is a good method, especially on bases. That's what I tend to do, and it'll generally work on bases to seal everything up. Elminster, what do you think of the Citadel heavy metal style of painting? Are you a fan of it at all? I also watched Dr. Faust and tried to adopt your methods and his. Yeah, I mean, I like it. I'm not, it's not my particular style, but I think they are very talented painters. And I think there's also a decent-ish range they operate in there. Like, the thing about the heavy metal style is how I would define it is very clean, Very even all over lighting, as though the ambient light is kind of coming from everywhere. And the depths are always the darkest and the edges are always the brightest, so they tend to work in that kind of a concept, whereas I tend to like prefer directional lighting where you will have areas of extreme darkness. So I don't like all over even highlights. Like I like the face and the shoulders or something being higher and brighter and more intense with a higher saturation than say the legs or something, right? And I like deep shadows and ultra high contrast. They don't tend to go as ultra high. So from a personal style, but I think it looks really good. It looks good as box art. I think it works for them, and I think they're all. Keep in mind the people in the studio are like all really talented artists, and so they might work in different styles in their own world, But they're trying to stay within a band, a fairly broad band, but a band of consistency for the product line, which by the way makes sense. Like I do not fault them at all for that choice. But yeah, I like it. It's just not my personal taste, which can sometimes lead to challenges. But I think my style I would describe as much rougher overall than theirs. The title should be correct now, Emily. So hopefully it's right. Hopefully people can tell me if the title's right. I changed it. It looked right when I then loaded it up. So hopefully it's correct. All right. Let's see. Logan, I was wanting to do a display board in a Mars setting. I don't want to use Martian Earth all over the base. Any ideas for other materials to use? Ho ho, my friend. I'm glad you asked. Yes, indeed. No, you would go broke doing Martian Earth. Excuse me while I scoot a dog butt out of the way here. My dogs like to lay around my chair, which is so super useful for getting in my shelves. Yes, I do have a recommendation, and that is you want to pick up some AK Interactive Dark and Dry Crackle Effects. It's a much bigger tub. This is about the same price as a single thing of Martian Iron Earth. You get a ton of this in there. It coats a lot. You'd probably need like 3 of these to do a display board, to be fair. But by the way, you shouldn't do the whole thing in this kind of crackle. Mars isn't all just cracked Earth, right? One of the problems I see people do with Martian bases is they just, and I've got this flagged as a tutorial for the future, they just do a crackle effect over the whole base and call it a day. That's not what Mars looks like. Like, you can go look at the rover footage. It's not just all cracked Earth everywhere, right? There's also just areas that we would recognize more as desert. So the key is you want to mix this in, because what you're trying to replicate with this is Mars has this sort of extremely oxidized iron heavy Earth and no active water on its surface, right? So all the water beds dried up outside the poles where there's sort of frozen ice. So, what you're trying to get is basically a desert wasteland tinted red. And so you want some areas of crackle, you want some areas of heavy grit and rocks. Use about 3 different types of grit or something in there. You want areas of sort of bigger rocks that like actual rocks as opposed to like grit rock, like rocks, physical rocks. You want areas of cliffs. You want to carve out some riverbeds, and that's where you could use like the crackle in, right? Because there are, famously one of the reasons they thought there were aliens on Mars is, because they could look up and see what they thought were canals and it's just, various geological structures. But those kind of dry riverbeds and stuff like that are good. So just make sure you're focusing a lot on, basically my answer would be Google lots of interesting Western United States deserts and kind of make it look like that, but red. More tinted red, and don't go like crazy red. I see a lot of people also do like red. Like I think Martian Iron Earth out of the pot is way too red. I think in the end you want to go more of like a Daler Rowney FW Inc. Red Earth. Have a little bit more brown in it, basically. Okay, let's see. Constantinos. Hey, Vince, how about glazing non-human skin? Like in an auric, when you have your purplish shadow, your greens as a base, your greeny yellowish highlights. What color will blend those? It's always your midtone. The answer is always your midtone, no matter what. So, I mean, if you want to interference color it on skin, which skin is another good opportunity to do that. If you've got a yellow-green high, you could use a little bit of a very thin red glaze. The very thin red glaze, when put over green, will turn brown, right? So it'll actually act as an additional shade that sort of darkens everything and brings it together. So that's certainly an option. You could use the purple a little bit if you wanted to really, really darken the skin, but it would need to be very thin. But if you're just going to reinforce the work you've already done, then yeah, just whatever your midtone is. Whatever that green is the glaze you would use to sort of smooth it all out. In general, the answer is you revert to the mean, right? You go back to your midtone, and that's where you're going to get the smoothness out of it. What I'm almost always glazing with is whatever my number 3 is on that scale I mentioned earlier, right? So high, mid, low, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 3 is your answer. So there you go. Joseph, hello from Spain. Hello. It's not too late over there, I guess. In your interview videos, I've heard some artists mentioning Kirill Kanaev. Yes. Hey, one of the advantages of doing this stream is that we can do this. So let's do this. Haha. Bam. We'll go over here and I will type Kirill, that guy right there. Kirill, and then the rest will come up hopefully for you. Miniature painting. And this is some of Kirill's work. He's, absolutely one of the best in the world. So I knew that was gonna happen. I don't know why. When did Google Images start putting its images over on the right side of the screen? That's super annoying. Is there a way to get rid of that? I don't know. I don't know. I just know it's annoying. Be like you were before, Google. Why do you change stuff that doesn't need to be changed? I love how Google just, now you all can't see this, but that's fine. I would be able to show you a bigger zoom in, but Google decided to change, so you just have to see the little images. But yeah, he's great. Absolutely amazing. Paints a lot of busts. This one's one of my favorites right here. This sort of the future girl. But again, I guess I can do this. I can pull this out. Stupid Google dumb crap. There you go. Okay. So yeah, that's kind of the bigger one. But that's Kirill. That's who we're talking about. And he is absolutely one of the best in the world. He is an extremely meticulous painter. One of the most meticulous people I've ever watched work. And he has a very ordered scientific approach to his painting. He thinks very deeply about the sort of properties of light and exactly how things work on a very, very deep scientific scale. He has an understanding of light that is probably, the match for anyone in the world of physics. I went to a 2-hour seminar he did simply on light, and it was 2 hours of him lecturing about the physics properties of light, how it moves, how colors interact. It was deep. But that obviously that skill comes through. His incredible deep understanding really does show through his work. But that's Kirill Kanaev. All right, let's see. Keep those questions coming, folks. Pylo says, I'm starting my Tyranid soon. Planning on doing a zenithal of brown, light brown, yellow brown. Leaving that as the flesh, and then using the zenithal for a guide on the chitin. Does this sound okay? Maybe the issue you're gonna have is a lot of Tyranids are in an unfortunate position for zenithaling, because they're forward like this, right? I had a Tyranid around here yesterday because I was assembling some for a class, but I think I put them all in the other room. What is to say they're all and very forward, right? So you're going to want to follow what I talk about in the understanding unusual zenithal highlighting video, where you're purposely not truly being from the zenith. Otherwise, the under part of their skin is just all going to be brown, right? If you just literally shoot from above in sort of the normal tactic, you're just going to get underskin of brown. So if he's going leaning forward, then you want to actually cheat and rotate him up like this and kind of pretend like the light is coming from a more forward direction on him. Will it be accurate? Who knows? The light can come from wherever you want. Will it look much better? Yes. Would I stop there? You could. You might want to think about going in with a soft glaze of maybe a mid-tone color over all that, just because when airbrush is the final step, it kind of looks like airbrush is the final step. And it has this look to it. But just a single glaze of maybe that mid-brown over it with your brush could make a big difference. And then I think you're good to go from there. But if it's a speed paint thing, if you've got 200 Hormagaunts or whatever the little dudes are to paint and you want to go fast, then yeah, I think it's fine. Just make sure you pop them up and get the angle correct. All right. Good. Name is correct. Okay. Yeah, so on the heavy metal thing. Yeah, no, they're assuming an all-over light. Like that light is coming from everywhere at once. And that there's no strong singular source of light. Um, it's what looks good on a box. It is as artistically valid as 100 other things. Does it make sense perhaps in the way that we tend to experience light in the real world? No, not really. But that doesn't really matter. Like, our goal as artists is not to replicate the real world exactly. If that was the standard of art, we would all be engaged in a very different process, and we should all basically be scientists. But like, we're trying to be artists, so our goal is to give some interpretation of the world, right? And that's their interpretation. So oftentimes you exaggerate things in art or whatever, you know. So same deal here. Let's see. I was going to use Woodland Scenics rock molds as well as play with the height as well. Awesome. Good stuff, Logan. I love Woodland Scenics Woodland Scenics rock molds. If people are looking for some good rock molds to just pour real easy and get some good quality, interesting rocks, I love those. I would recommend, Logan. I agree. I use them all the time. Every time I do any kind of pour of other stuff that I'm working on, like with Hearst Arts molds, for various walls and bricks and stuff for basing, I'll always add in the rock mold too and just generate a bunch of additional rocks for myself because it's just the easiest pour. All right. Greetings. Will you do non-metallic on brutes for Warcry beginner paint? No, I don't do non-metallic on anything that's. I don't tend to do metallic on army stuff. The reason is because I just don't think it looks as good generally in reality. That is to say, it doesn't tend to look as good in reality masked on a table in the often deficient lighting of your average room where a tournament is being held. Non-metallic metal is a great looking effect. It takes a long time. I do a lot of non-metallic, but I do it on competition stuff or something where I know I'm going to have good control of the light and I want to take time with it. All of my iron draws are in true metallic. So, and I have videos on how I do all of the iron draws true metallic. Now the key is I integrate the lessons of non-metallic metal into true metallic metal. So I don't just paint the metal and then wash it or some garbage like that. I don't mean to be harsh, but like, don't stop washing your metal and ruining it. Unless you're intending it to be a rusted old piece of junk, then in which case, wash away, go nuts, start throwing washes all over it, because that's how you get to old, rusted, dull metal, and then it's super fun. But assuming you're going for some kind of like shiny, in-use, somewhat cared-for metal, I will do the same thing. Like, I'll take inks and paint, and I'll create shadows, and I'll take brighter silver, and I'll create more highlights. I'll do interference colors. So it's all the same stuff. It's just still real metal paint underlying it. And the reason I like that is because I feel like it just gives a better look, no matter, because I don't know what angle people are going to be looking at the miniature on the table at, right? Like, as it walks around the table and stands on things and sits in a hall in what could be very yellow or very different light. I think it just has a better effect to it for my personal tastes. So no, I don't generally tend to do my armies in NMM. But I mean, if I was going to, it would be the same as most of the NMM videos that I've done. Which I'm actually thinking about doing a couple updates on them, because there's some different styles that I've been exploring of NMM recently. So you'll probably see a couple other extrapolations of that kind of thing coming out at some point. All right. Boom, 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 boom. Berserk. Hey, Vince, is there actually a difference between the different Vallejo texture paste, or is it just color? No, there is actually a difference. The size of the grit in them. So, like, the white stone is just flat. There's no texture to it at all. It's great for doing, like, plaster and stuff like that and smooth walls. Or, like, walls that have been sort of stuccoed. Then you go to, like, some of the different ones. The mud is very, very thin grit that just is meant to be, like, kind of rough, coarse mud. Up to, like, some of the gray and white paste I like that is, like, super duper chunky and just looks like very rocky, rough earth. So yes, they absolutely have a texture difference as well. The desert sand, for example, when it dries, really does have a great texture for desert sand. It's super small, hyper fine. It has like a Saharan desert type of texture. And in the end, the color doesn't matter because you're just going to prime it and paint over it. Like I've never used a color straight out of the pot. The answer is cork. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, nothing but cork. No. No. Elminster, I want to get an airbrush. Any recommendations for a good starting airbrush? Yes. Go onto Amazon, find like the master airbrush starter kit that has like a tank and an airbrush in it and like other little things like a hose and stuff like that. It's usually, if you're in the US, I don't know how much it is to ship to Shadowdale, so I can't speak about that. But in the US, it's about $80. And yes, I'm just going to continue this joke like I'm really conversing with the real Elminster because it's funny to me. Um, but in the US, it's about $80. You'll find the kit on. It's a repackaged thing. It is a cheap airbrush. Comes with the G22. If you bust the airbrush buying a new one, like you can get a new G23 standalone for about $20. So if you break it, who gives a hoot? And you will break it. You will screw it up. And the reason I say start with a cheap airbrush, I see people say, well, no, you should start with something nice and blah, 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 because you won't really get the right feel and you can't do as much. Yeah, that's true. You can't do as much. You don't know what you're doing. I wouldn't give a 16-year-old kid keys to like a new BMW. That is a great way to ruin a car, right? You buy a 16-year-old kid a junker, something that will like if they screw it up, who cares? I mean, it's still bad, but you're not out $50,000 or something. You're out 1,000, whatever. I mean, I know my first car was less than $2,000, and I drove it until I was 21, so I got 5 good years of use out of it. But I mean, you want to talk about your value right there. I drove a Dodge Colt, 4-speed, manual brakes, manual windows, manual everything, no stereo. Yeah, living that high life. But it was a tank that could barely be stopped, and I loved it. And I drove it so long until eventually a wheel fell off. I was backing out of an Arby's parking lot, and the back wheel literally fell off, and I saw it rolling away in my back window. That is a weird feeling. That's a non sequitur, but there you go. So yeah, get that master airbrush kit. Okay. Let's see. Sorry, I kind of jumped around in the list there because it scrolled down on me and I didn't notice. I had to go back and catch up. Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to refine my spot. Got it. Okay. Emily, I'm looking at getting a big girl airbrush versus my cheap Amazon one. Sure. So let's continue this discussion. What would you go to next? I will give you my honest recommendation. If you're looking for your second airbrush, now let's say you've used that master airbrush as much as you can, and now you need to step up. You're ready to go out and buy your Honda Civic, right? Great. Then you go out and you get yourself an Iwata HPCS. This would be my very strong recommendation. I've used a lot of different airbrushes. I own 7 or 8 airbrushes probably. So, and this is my workhorse. I've used this thing for 5 years. It's my priming and my varnishing and my basing work. It is my heavy workhorse, and I love this thing to death. It's built like a tank, and I could not be more happy with this purchase. Now this is probably $150, something like that in the US. And I mean, I've gotten the value out of it. I can't even imagine how many hundreds of hours I have put into this airbrush. So, I mean, we're down to like pennies or, maybe like 20 cents an hour or something at this point that I actually spent for it. So I think that's a great deal. That would be my recommendation for what to step up to next. There are higher level airbrushes if you want to get into something really, really nice. In general, get to the HPCS, get yourself good on that. That will let you do most of what you need to do for like learning your proper dual action brush control and getting really good. Then you could go to like an Iwata Highline, or if you really want to drop the change, you can get like you can get one of these, right? So you can go grab yourself like an Infinity, like a Harder and Steinbeck, and this thing is, I mean, this is machine precision. That's hard to replicate. But again, then you're up into like the $300 to $400 range. So, just be mindful that you want to you don't need to invest it all at once. That's my answer. I am generally a fan of spend as little money as possible at all points in time. I am a very cheap person, and so I am always looking for value. And as far as Emily, your question about needle size, that comes with a standard point 0.3, the HPCS. You can swap it with a point 0.5 or a point 0.2. They make tips for both, but the point 0.3 will do basically everything you need. You don't need to worry about other needle sizes. I've never switched to a point 0.5. I see no value in it whatsoever. It's just like I can cover something just as fast with a point 0.3 as I could with a point 0.5. I just lose detail with a point 0.5, and the movement from point 0.3 to point 0.2 is like pretty minimal. Okay. To do two. Great. Okay. Logan, have you tried Scale 75 Soilworks pigments? I have not. I have a bunch of pigment. I have a bunch of Secret Weapon. I have Vallejo. I have some of the like Abilung or whatever it's called pigments. I've used all those. I haven't tried any of the Scale 75 stuff yet. I'm sure I'll pick some up eventually because I do love raw pigment. It's infinitely useful for a lot of different purposes, especially when it comes to terrain and basing. But no, I haven't picked it up yet. But I'll give it a shot sometime. Okay, Konstantinos. Last question. Doesn't have to be, buddy. You can ask as many as you want in the time allotted. If you see war paint on real-life warriors, you see body paint that breaks a lot, just like a crackle paint on bases. How do you do that on mini skin? Yeah, sure. So, did I actually do a tutorial on this? I don't know. Maybe I did it as part of something else. But like war paint, the key is you want it to be very dry, and it's not actually often cracking as much. Like sometimes it will. But it's like a very dry, rough paint. So I think of like the warrior, the Native American warrior out of the most recent season of Westworld, which that was like the best episode, the one that focused on that character. No spoilers. Just if you know who I'm talking about. His paint did tend to break up, especially the white, because it's a very dry pigment. So that was tending to crack. Oftentimes, a lot of the paint will simply be very dry, and it won't get into the recesses. So whenever there's like a skip, it will, like in a wrinkle or something, it goes over the top, and it didn't get down in that crack. My method for it, ironically, to continue from our previous discussion, is to mix raw pigment into the paint. So I'll generally take a pigment color of the war paint I want, and because that's how it would have been made sort of in reality, right? They would have started with a pigment and then mixed in some kind of medium to get it to stick, and then they would go on with their fingers and dab it on. But because it's so pigment heavy and so dry, it's not like a properly balanced medium to solvent to, or yeah, medium to solvent to pigment ratio, it will dry out. So you can replicate that same thing in small scale by mixing raw pigment with, generally I'll use a neutral color, like a gray or an ivory paint. And so I make the pigment a little darker than I want it to go on the model, since the white's going to lighten it up. And I just kind of mix that together, and then very roughly I apply it in a pseudo dry brush way, like with a regular brush, but with most of it wiped off. And I just kind of make the sketches across the thing. Make sure the brush doesn't get down in those cracks. I don't know if I actually recorded it, but when I did the I literally don't remember. Maybe when I did the Gorgrunta pig flesh video, I don't know. I'll go back and look if I did. Sorry, there's like 200 of them. I can't remember everyone. Some of them I know well, some I'm not. But if not, I'll add it to the list and do a full video one in the future. Okay. Reckonuk. We're missing a vowel there. Hey, Vince, GW put up a video about using contrast over darker base coats, like a wash. Would you recommend using them as such? And if yes, which ones? Thanks. Yeah, sure. They work really well like that. I did a little bit of that in the video where you saw me mixing them over other colors. But yeah, I mean, I've used them quite frequently in the same colors that I've mentioned before. So like the Fyreslayer Flesh, the Gryph-hound Orange, the Iyanden Yellow, and the Akelliant Green are sort of my favorites. And yeah, I mean, just think about what you're doing there, right? Like, you could start with a neutral tone, and, you get a very bright version of that color. You could take it and use it as a sort of thin glaze or something. Again, like I mentioned earlier, you could put the red over green to get basically a brown. You just need to think about how the two colors are interacting. You're effectively putting a transparent ink-like paint over a color underneath it. So think about how those two things are going to interact, right? If you put blue over orange, you're going to get brown, right? Because you're adding complementary colors. But sure, yeah, 100% you can do that. And there's lots of fun effects you can play with. But what I would use would be generally the more intense ones. So not the ones that have the little fuzzy fog effect on there, like Magos purple and the Apothecary white and whatever the heck the gray, Space Wolves gray. The ones that are all like more weak in how they cover. I would use the normal ones and probably just mix them with a little contrast medium or something like that. Metallics Zenithal, is it possible because all metallics are opaque? Yes, it is. I have 2 videos on it. I want to say it's Hobby Cheating 103 and 104. I walk you through how to do steel and gold metallics using some Stormcast. And if you're looking to get a Stormcast army on the table in about a week, I could paint 2,000 points of Stormcast using that technique easily by next weekend. It would not be difficult. If there was like a Star Drake in there, that might be hard because those guys are a little bigger and have a little different stuff going on. But that's, yes, you absolutely can. You take like a dark steel mixed with black, and that's your first coat, and then steel, and then silver from above. Or you do the whole thing in steel, and then you just shoot black ink from below in an anti-zenithal and silver from above. Either way will work. Like there's many roads that lead to the end of a steel zenithal. Okay. Okay. Steven asks, I'm painting some Seraphon with inks with Zenithal. Cool. Perfect. They're great for it. Going for a blue-purple color gradient. Okay. Got it. My first models turned darker than I want. Should I try to go over with some dry brush on their scales? Yes, absolutely. So with Lizardmen and things like that have those scales, before you do the glazes of the ink, dry brush them with like a bright ivory. Because chances are your Zenithal white isn't very white. Like white Zenithaling just doesn't tend to end very white. It's still pretty gray. Prove that to yourself by painting some pure white or taking some pure white paint out of a tube and then hold your miniature Zenithal next to that white and just marvel at the difference in intensity. Okay? So if you go there and dry brush, it will get a more intense thing. It'll also pick out the scales. You know, Lizardmen have a lot of like really interesting facial ridges and stuff like that. And little musculature movements. They have a lot of like interesting skin sort of, grabs where sort of their big thick skin is sort of bunching up. You can pick all that out and then try thinning your ink a little more, just a little bit more, because it's always easier to just do 2 layers. If you put on the first layer as a glaze and it's not strong enough, you can go back with a second layer, no problem. It's very hard to take those off, right? So that's my advice. And yeah, I think you'll have great results. I've speed painted some Seraphon using that method, and I think it looks really good because they're made for that kind of a technique, being that they're often heavily textured with their scales, and they tend to be rather uniform, right? They're all just an organic substance. There's not a lot for most of the models. There's not a lot of like armor and belts and boots and guns and nonsense on them. They're like the anti-Zinch. The Big Goblin says, started airbrushing 2 weeks ago with the Neo Iwata. Broke the nozzle yesterday. It sucks. Yeah. I cracked the nozzle on one. Like, absolutely. Yeah, like, they're very sensitive tools. You'll eventually, like, sort of get a more careful hang of it where you don't really have to worry. You can order just a replacement nozzle, by the way. You don't have to buy a new airbrush. Unless you cracked the body of the thing. And I actually keep extras of all of my airbrush components here. So like, yeah, there we go. That's within reach. So like I keep an extra Iwata nozzle at all times, as well as an extra Iwata needle. So, it's a worthwhile investment. Just have an extra one. That way, if it busts and you're in the middle of doing a bunch of work, you can just replace it because accidents happen. It's life. And, it's a small investment up front. I've had that one for a couple years. I've been fortunate enough not to break one, but it makes me happy to know that if I was in the middle of a project and cracked the thing, I wouldn't have to stop and wait, however many days for some replacement. So just replace it and then order a new one and you're good to go. Okay. While we're talking about airbrushes, what should a beginner know about airbrush needle size? Just use a 0.3 or a 0.35. That's the answer. That's what you need to know about airbrush needle size. Like I, point 0.5 is going to spray wider. It has a wider cone that comes out of the front. Point 0.2 is theoretically thinner. There's you make a lot more hay out of your control of the dual action than you do out of whatever needle the airbrush has. 0.5s just have very little actual functional use because they're just too big to get and do any kind of small work. 0.35 is fine. It won't tend to 0.35, 0.3 is fine. They won't tend to clog. You can put most stuff through them. It's the middle ground. It is the middle bowl of porridge. It's all you need. If some years down the line, if you're a master of the airbrush, sure, you can play around with different sizes for different purposes. But that's what would be my advice. Water Fater. I have a problem with my washes, Vallejo and GW, dry white. Any idea why this happens? Yes, because they're not mixed properly. They are the medium has separated from the pigment, and what you are getting is just raw, glossy medium drying. That's why it looks white. You are not shaking. You're not following Duncan's advice and shaking your shades enough before you apply them. And if you tell me, well, I am shaking them a lot, well, then either they've gone bad and you can't recombine them, or you need to put an agitator in there. By agitator, I mean you need something non-ferrous in there to kind of shake it around and break it up. So I will use old pewter miniatures. Like I'll just use old crappy pewter miniatures that are never going to get painted, and I'll cut them into pieces and put that in there. Warcolors sells like little plastic beads. In general, I stay away from anything that says stainless steel, because stainless steel wasn't generally meant to be in a solvent all day like that. It's stainless to a point. I've seen plenty of quote unquote stainless steel rust. So just, go if you have something that's aluminum or something like that, that's fine. So there you go. Mickey R or Mikey. Mikey. I don't know, man. I don't know which way it is. I never thought about that before. I've always said your name in my head. All right, another airbrush question. It's an airbrush day, apparently. That's fine. My Iwata Eclipse has started acting funny. Pulling back is fine, but plunging down, the trigger gets stuck. How should I debug it? The answer is take it apart and clean it. Chances are you've got a little paint down in the trigger mechanism, so you need to very carefully, like there are instructions inside, you need to disassemble the whole thing, clean it, and then re-oil it. I'm not a big fan of their super lube that they come with. It's okay. Your better bet is probably like, you can use like some gun oil if you have that. Like the oil they use for the trigger mechanisms on firearms is really good because that's a lot of metal on metal action, and that's a really good oil for making your airbrush run very smooth and cleanly. You can pick it up at most like big box stores if they. Or something like that, or other associated places. You can just order it online too from like Amazon or whatever. I am not a firearms enthusiast by any stretch of the imagination, but that oil is very useful. Okay, all right. Let's see, Mithlindar. Vince, do you have any tips for repairing a broken spear? I broke my Alarial spear, and it's not that easy to fix, even with pins. No, it's not. I mean, you're already on the right direction. If you're using it, like, a pin is the right answer. I assume you snapped it at, like, where the head connects to the shaft of the spear, because that's where that thing breaks, because that's where all thin spears like that break. Running a thin pin in is probably your best bet, but it's just not an easy thing to fix. I wish I had a better tip for you. Hold it stable in something. So like set up some kind of little clamps to hold everything stable is probably the best bet when you're regluing it together. That way you make sure that it's not getting like, kind of wonky in its shape. But other than that, it's a tough fix. It really is. Go for a weapon swap? I don't know. Okay. Regarding pigments, mixing them with oil paints was a revelation. Much better than mixing with acrylic. Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. I use a lot of. I'll lay pigment down and then do an oil wash over the top, especially on like terrain. It's great. It's freaking great. Locks them right in. Works really well. Thank you very much on the keeper. We'll see if I can do it again on this King of Ecstasy. Dorn Jr., do you have any masking suggestion for spraying two colors different on a tempestuous scions where the armor plates overlap fabric. Sure. Absolutely, I do. I actually, I don't know if I'll get around to doing a product review on this or not. So here's two options for you. Assuming you don't want tape or whatever, that's fine. You can use Silly Putty, and I've used Silly Putty for a long time, and I like Silly Putty. But I just recently picked up one of these because it came out and I thought it looked kind of neat. So it's the AK Camouflage Plastic Putty. It's this stuff right here. And it looks like, first of all, this thing really seals, which I suppose is good. But it is a heck of a challenge. I don't have any fingernails. Ah, there we go. Got it. To get the lid off. You can see it's like a black putty. Over time, it will, excuse me, it will level out like that. But you just get in there, just dig your finger down in there, pull out a chunk, and it can just, you can rip it, recombine it. It's basically like black Silly Putty. It just seems to be a little less, it's like it doesn't pull paint. It reshapes really nicely. I actually really like it. So like on the miniature, if I wanted to cover this piece over, you can just put that little glob on there and then just kind of spread it out. And like, it's not going to pull up paint ever. So I've used this a bunch and I've never had any issues with pulling paint at all. But yeah, something like that's probably the best way to go. Because you can just put a little glob down and then just push it to the edges of the cloth or the armor, whichever side you're doing. So yeah, AK Camouflage Plastic Putty. I would recommend. I really like it. I'm going to take a drink here because I'm losing my voice. All right. Let's see. Let's see. Are you asking me if I'll do a Berserk? Are you asking me if I'll do a tutorial on Tomb King basing? I've done 2 different videos on desert bases. 3 different videos on desert bases, actually. Both painting them and building them up. So check out the building up a large base video. Check out the desert base, both building and painting. That's how I would do Tomb King bases. So there you go. Unless you're looking for like, you don't mean desert, unless you mean like their temples or stuff like that. Then yeah, sure, just some green stuff rollers mixed in with sand is probably the right way to go. Rob, for my current project, I plan on painting my flesh eaters with half red and half blue skin, vertically split like old Bretonia. That's gonna look weird, man. I'll tell you right now. Like, I get what you're going for. That is gonna look really weird. Because our eyes are just trained not to think skin looks like that. I'll answer your question. But let me play in this space for a minute because I like where your head's at. I'm gonna give you some other ideas. Tell me if any of this works for you. Here's option the first. Go for a dead flesh and then give them some red war paint stapled on one side of their face and the other side of their face on their arm. So use the red and blue, but put it on as war paint using the method I mentioned earlier. They think they're wearing fineries, but in fact, it's stuff that they've just spread on themselves. Like, they see themselves as putting on these fine cloaks and of silks and stuff, and what they're actually doing is just spreading, mud and red and blue all over themselves. Option 2, red and blue tattoos on counter sides of them to bring that back in. Option 3, use red and blue as your shadow colors and alternate it in the flesh. That's going to look weird. But the reason that's going to look really strange is because we have this sort of core conception about how flesh works, and we generally expect flesh to be uniform. So splitting it like that will really jar people. Now, the way you'd make it work would be you'd mix in a lot of flesh tone. Like, let's say Caucasian flesh tone. Like a medium flesh tone. And like a pale flesh or a medium flesh would be your highlight. So your 1 and 2 would still be flesh tone, your high and your mid-high. Your mid-tone would be flesh plus red, and then your 4, your mid-low, and your low would be red, deep red. That's how you would do it. Basically, you'd be following for like how you paint red skin, which is using that, and how you paint blue skin, which is doing what I just said. It'll just be different because it's split down the middle. So, that's doing weird colors of skin. The key is just keep some kind of flesh tone in there somewhere. Usually in the high highlights is where it will read better. So there's 3 options for you. Use the one that you like. And may the lady guard you and bless you. All right. Riddlegart. I have a large Death Guard army and I use Rakarth flesh and Pallid Witch flesh. I want to switch to Pro-Acryl. Any suggestions on which of their paints to use? Yeah, probably the warm grays. So like the heavy warm gray and the bright warm gray, that kind of stuff would be really in line. You could pull in a little bit of like the regular ivory to lighten it up. You could drop in the slightest touch of either the camo green or the dark camo green if you wanted to tint that way a little bit. But those would be what I used. I used a lot of the heavy warm gray on my Death Guard, and that was like it's a good replication of sort of that. Maybe you pull in a little bit of ivory, maybe you pull in a little bit of green, but that's a good replication of that Death Guard color spectrum. All right. Mikey, gun oil isn't really that available in the UK. Can I use acetone to clean it? Sure. Not to make it lubricated. Would I damage the valve if I soaked it in acetone overnight? Yes. Like any non-metal part, you will damage. Like the rubber should not soak in acetone. Mikey. Okay, cool. You're not a mouse. Fair answer, buddy. All right, Mikey. Yeah, don't leave anything. Like, you're going to have a lot of, like, O-rings and sort of rubber parts in there. As long as you take all those off, acetone is perfectly fine to get everything clean on the airbrush. It's got, like, a nice chrome protection on it. Acetone will just, clean that right off. You could also use jewelry cleaner. There are various jewelry cleaners out there. I use those on my airbrush a lot, and those are real good, and will make it shine, too. It'll be the shiniest it's been since you bought it. But you need to take, like, the rubber O-rings off wherever you can. It won't damage the copper or the steel or anything like that. Now, as far as like lubing it up, like just look for some alternatives to it. You can use various different oils. You can use the super lube that comes in there. It's fine. It's not like it just can get a little gummy over time. So you like by putting it in there, eventually it will kind of dry and gum. So you're gonna be back on the same chain again. Whereas I find with like those kinds of oils, it's much less. So, just a thought. Oh, there you go. Cool. In England, there is a huge rod and game culture. You just have to find the stores or make friends with the farmers. Oh, neat, Grimlock Steve. Super cool. Yeah, I mean, obviously, I don't know over in the UK. Obviously, it's not a problem over here to get a hold of that stuff. So, there you go. Okay. But I'll let you and Grimlock Steve hash that out because I don't know the UK well enough to direct you there. But you could also Google some alternatives. I'm sure there's other stuff out there that's the equivalent, other oils like that. It's basically you're looking for like a non-heavy grade lubricant for machined parts, right? Because you don't want anything that's meant to keep like an engine running. Like you don't want some 10W30. That's too thick. Galen, have you ever heard about companies like Pactra, Mr. Hobby, or Hatica? If yes, what do you think about their paint sets? I have never heard of any of them. I will look them up. That sounds interesting. I'm always interested in new paints. But no, I have never heard of any of them, so I can't answer that one. Green Stuff World makes similar airbrush putty if you like that store better. Cool. Awesome. Haven't tried that one. Yep, been using Silly Putty. Yeah, I use Silly Putty a lot. I mean, this is basically like it's some variation of Silly Putty. I'm sure this is a very similar recipe. Okay. It just is like a little less kind of greasy than Silly Putty is what I would say. Like Silly Putty can sometimes have a bit of a like an oil to it. Yeah, I don't know. I like it. Again, not necessary by any stretch. If you're looking for the simple option, Silly Putty's the simple option. Yes, love the quote from the Transformers movie there, Mikey. Absolutely, Grimlock is king, as we all know. All right. Oh, there you go. Okay, Reg Dab from Badger. Oh, nice. Okay, cool. It does not go gummy. Excellent. I was not aware of that. So there you go. So that's a great recommendation. Thanks, Alex. I will check that out. All right. Rayhan, what do you think of a dark purple brute warband for Warcry? The green, purple, and brass are the three main colors. Will that work? Yes, 100% that will work. It's a great triad right there. Yes, that would look really sweet. Purple and green look great together. They make good villains. There's a reason why Mr. Glass dresses in purple and green, and Lex Luthor's power armor is purple and green, and it's a good villainous color combination. So yes, it looks good together. I don't know if WD-40 would work or not. You'd want to look into that. I mean, maybe. It's a pretty amazing substance. I just don't know. All right. Oh, look at that. Boom, we got to the end of the questions. Oh my gosh, and we're at an hour. All right, I could stop here. Oh yeah, Green Goblin, another character who uses purple and green. But instead, let's do some lightning round stuff. Oh, there you go. It eats rubber. Okay. So let's do some lightning round. We're at our hour, but if there's some more quick questions, fire them off. Everybody drop those last questions in. This has been a very airbrushed focused episode, which I love. That was cool. I like that people kind of were riffing on each other and asking lots of good questions. So that's super fantastic. But let's get any final questions you've got in there. If there are none, I'll call it a day. But I'll answer through those, and then we'll wrap it up. Hopefully by the time we do this next month, I'll have much better control of this stream thing. I apologize, between like filming new videos and travel and working on models, I haven't had as much time to play with this as I want, but I am trying to learn and teach myself how to use this new, this new software and stuff. So I will get there. Let's see. All right. Age of Slaanesh. Would dark purple, red, gold, and white work for the Cypher Lords? Dark purple. Let me think about that. So here, I'm going to show you the trick. All right. Well, instead of just me thinking about it in the raw, let's go back over here to the internet because we've got that capability. And let's go to our bookmarks here. And lots of stuff all related to miniatures. Bam. So Sessions College, right here, Sessions College, has a color calculator. So let's go for a triadic color scheme, and we'll pull it down into the purple, and then let's activate our triadic and see where we end up. So in this color of purple, what you have is, we can swing this around, right? So there's your, it's actually like it wants you to go into a green gold. Now my guess is if I bring it over here, so I think you're probably a little off with that one. Now let's see if I go split complementary. Or sorry, triadic instead of split complementary. I can probably get into purple, red. I bet I can swing that around and get something that works. Yeah, there you go. Kind of your red, blue, yellow, your standard thing. So the answer is, if I was in this purple and like an orange, red, and maybe a green, I could probably get that working. Something like that. So you could push that a little more into the red. If you kind of desaturate them down or something, you can play with that. But this is what I use a lot. So, you can get your analogous color scheme, triadic, tetradic, or quadratic color scheme, right? And then you can, like, save this and stuff like that. So this is what I use a lot to just sort of look and test colors. You don't have to follow this as a hard rule. It's not like this is the only thing that works, right? But this is sort of a good way to just, like, test your thought. My general feeling is dark purple, red, and gold. Like, gold's true color is yellow. So what you're really asking me is, does purple, red, and yellow work? And the problem there is you're kind of just on this side of the color wheel. You haven't really swung over here anymore. If you push the purple into a very blue purple, then I think you'd probably have a stronger... It would work. If you went very magenta purple, that could also work, but then you're really tightly analogous. So you would want the gold to be, like, really rich, basically. All right. Okay. Can you airbrush oil paints? I literally have no idea. I have never tried. I don't know if it would work. It seems like it wouldn't, but I assume if you thin it down enough, it would. You can turn oil paints into basically a wash consistency, and it's anything the consistency of a wash would go through an airbrush. So, probably. I've just never done it. I don't know what that would look like. You'd have to clean your airbrush with white spirits afterward, obviously. Kind of an interesting thing. I mean, I bet if I... Let's find out. Boy, having the internet here is really handy. Just being able to switch over to it. Let's see. Airbrushing oil paints. Yeah, there's a couple people playing with it, so must be some way to do it. There you go. Okay, but I've never tried it. Let's see. Cheap primers from, say, Home Depot or Best Primers. I never use a rattle can, always airbrush, and my choices are Stynylrez from Badger and Vallejo. The only time I use a rattle can is for terrain. It's just thick. It obscures detail too easy. It's too easy to get speckling. It's too easy for it to go wrong because of humidity and other stuff. With the airbrush, I have cheap, easy, fast control. What would you use for the mirror effect headdress on Cypher Lords? I don't know. I haven't painted mine yet, so I haven't thought about it. Are you just asking me, like, how would I paint them? I'm not sure yet. Are you asking me how to paint a mirror? Stay tuned for a couple weeks. You'll see a tutorial. And that is mainly using, like, deep blues to white gray and then glazing in or filtering in an interference color of turquoise. Any suggestions on color choices for bronze non-metallic metal? Bronze non-metallic metal is kind of annoying, but basically, you know, usually like some kind of a mid brown with like a gray or a white and then a black is more or less how you do it. Bringing in like a tiny hint of orange or something can be good, or a tiny hint of red can be good. When I say tiny, I mean like very, 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 very tiny. Should I drink Agrax Earthshade? Definitely not. Don't do that. That's gross. Will we get more videos of painting rats? Maybe. Hard to say. If I find something interesting that I think I want to cover using rats, I'll cover more rat stuff. I don't have any rats currently on the docket, but you never know. I mean, I can tell you if we get an Eschen release or something ever, yes, you will see rat videos galore, and it'll be like how to paint sweet ninja outfits and poison throwing stars. So, you know, it's out there. Vince, do you have a video on the opposite of zenithal priming, like the Nelidial or whatever priming? Also, which Warcry warband are you doing? I'm doing Cypher Lords. They're back there behind me. Finishing this guy up first, and then I'm going to do them. I do have some various videos on undershading, but really the answer is just, so like go watch the Orc Skin video, which is like early hundreds. And you'll see that I do an anti-zenithal of whole red. That's usually how I start. This guy started with an anti-zenithal of purple, and it's literally just taking your airbrush and going like this from below with purple. That's it. That's all there is to it. It's the simplest thing in the world. Let's see. Does the valve come off the Iwata Eclipse? I don't know where the manual is. I don't know. I don't have yeah, wait. Are you talking about like the HPCS? Yes, everything on that comes off. So that all disassembles. I was told in AOS there are a race of volcanic Skaven. I'm sure there is. There's rats everywhere. So I'm sure there's fire rats in Akshi. There's an air fleet of rats. Like they killed off a bunch of Kharadron overlords and have their own air force. So there's a whole Skaven claw, like a claw pack that is on Kharadron overlord airships. And if that's not the coolest thing ever, I don't know what is. It's a Scryer force, obviously. Yes, Mikey, everything in the HPCS disassembles. Yes, the valve will come off. Speaking of anti-zenithal, would you not just do an undershade instead? What's the difference? Yeah, sure. You could just like start with that color. The difference is it gives me a little more control. It's just the timing of the thing, right? Like I like setting my initial tone with the primer, and then I come back in with the undershade from below to shadow it. You know, like the order of operations can sometimes matter because it'll show what dominates, and where you're sort of sending or what you're sort of setting the tone to. But sure, you can go any direction. Skyven. Yes. Skyven, absolutely. It's sort of a thing I've wanted to convert for a while, but there's just no real reason to do it. Maybe when the Kharadron Overlords get a new book, I'll do a counts as Skaven Force. We'll see. Rats are always fun, and they always tempt me back. Yeah, it's exactly. It's a consolidation of the shadow. It's kind of redefining it, colorizing it, and just giving me a little more control of what I want there. And, sometimes I'll just go back and forth. Like working the airbrush back and forth a little bit at the beginning in those kind of variations just gives you an interesting example of, like, how to play with light. So, with that being said, that brings us to the end of our time together, folks. But I do hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was very helpful. I hope I answered a lot of your questions. I do these at least once a month. This month it will be once because I have lots of weekend travel coming up between NashCon and Nova. So I wanted to get this. I wanted to get this out there. It does sound like there's an appetite for some airbrush videos, so I'll think deeply about what other airbrush tutorials I can do. I'm actually about to film one today. Shh. So I already know there's one coming. So there you go. And it should be something I've been asked about a lot, and helping people get some really smooth finishes. So there you go. But at any rate, thank you very much, everybody, for watching. I do hope this was very helpful. If you've got more questions, of course, feel free to drop them down in the comments below, and I'm happy to help. But as always, I appreciate you watching this, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.